uncomfortable.
Okay, Bird. So, knowing that you have done this with writing prompts where you tend to write to a person so that it flows easier and is more coherent, in a voice that actually, makes sense to you, I'm trying to do the same thing but verbally. I have 7 topics. First one is collaborating with yourself, because there's this concept of having Artners that I like, where you have people that you collaborate with externally as a trusted creative partner that you can work with often and conveniently. And it's a term I stole from another artist whose name is escaping me now, but if it comes back to me at some point, I will link them in the show notes. But I also think that it gets undervalued of treating yourself like your own Artner, because your creative mind and your normal functioning mode, in the early phases at least, when you haven't had a lot of practice with it, considering yourself a collaborator is very helpful in giving yourself a lot more leeway and permission and not beating yourself up when things don't get done as quickly or in the right way. But your inner Artner has to be treated like an external force sometimes. You don't always know what's going on with that unless you engage it more directly. The first thing you have to kind of understand is it's not a talent or a skill. It's a mode of operating. It's kind of trying to get back into the way you functioned as a kid before you had a lot of external pressures and responsibilities, where you would just enjoy the moment and stop looking for outcomes, which when you're trying to seek the outcome at the beginning or at any phase of a creative process, actually, it is usually not helpful towards getting that inner Artner to help you generate ideas. If you can get comfortable with the idea of playing without expecting an immediate outcome or an obvious benefit, then you're miles ahead. Because it's usually that expectation of outcome that inhibits your ability to start getting creative with stuff at all. You sit down to write, you sit down to paint, and you expect that something is going to be accomplished, something's going to come from this that you can point at and be proud of, and that's most of the time not the case. I don't know how common of an idea it is, but out of creatives who made a lot more work than we are familiar with.
Michelangelo is known to have completed somewhere in the range of, I believe, thousands of drawings, but don't quote me on that because I don't have the exact figure off the top of my head. He religiously drew as both preparation for later artwork as well as an exercise in studying the world around him. He burned a good portion of his own drawings because he was so dissatisfied with them, and we only really know him for the finished, polished works. But it's important to remember, even with artists like Michelangelo, where we hold them to the esteem of most talented artists of all time, that he had a massive body of preparatory work, of unedited work, of sketch work, that he himself was dissatisfied with, and that none of us have ever seen.
So Michelangelo's a much better example than who I had in mind. But yeah, it's that idea that there's this expectation that because we're familiar with the masterworks of these very famous creative people, and we're familiar and in love with these few pieces that we identify as being of that quality, we hold ourselves to an expectation of at least getting somewhere close to that, when most of the time they never got close to that. And it's an unreasonable expectation to put on yourself. And this is why treating yourself as your own Artner, if you think of your creativity as a separate entity, it's easier to give it that permission, that kindness, that leeway that you might not allow your own ego. It's interesting because the technique is similar to one they use for treating certain behavioral and anxiety conditions. Eating disorders is one of them. They will have you address the voice that's kind of feeding into the behavior as a separate thing. So they'll usually have you name it so that when you have that thought, you can address it like it's an external person to create more distance between you and the thought, so it doesn't feel like you. And this is another realm where having that sort of separation between you and the outcome is very helpful.
What if you don't have a voice to address?
So if you, as someone who doesn't have an inner voice, if you don't have an internal voice to address, it's honestly a lot easier to access this stuff. Intrusive thoughts are usually the bigger problem for people who are struggling with being kinder about their own creative journeys and outputs. Actually, I wasn't expecting to go down this path, but when you learn how to think, if you have an inner voice, what happens is around the age of 2, you start thinking in words because you hear what people around you are saying. And that's why a lot of thought for people gets coded as verbal. And the interesting fact is that the first thing that pops up as a thought is almost never actually your thought. It's you expecting to hear something from who you learned to think from. So if you grew up in an environment where people were highly critical, that critical thought will pop up first. But that's not your voice, that's the voice that you're expecting because of how the pattern usually went. So it becomes tricky to react to that as if it's not you, which is why treating yourself as an Artner helps. But yeah, if you don't have an inner voice, it's kind of easier because you don't have the same echo that pops up. It doesn't fight with you as easily because it doesn't have the ability to recreate the toxic statements that other people might have said around you. But the important thing is that if you're trying to be creative with nothing but the intention of having something to show for it, it will get you what you want, kind of, but you won't like it as much. If you're just trying to execute for the sake of, there is some, obviously, value in that, but, if you're exploring for the sake of exploring, you're going to find more interesting things than if you're exploring looking for a specific thing. I think it's, there's a quote from a movie, it was called Zero Effect, and it was a retake on the Sherlock Holmes sort of brilliant deductive person, but he was agoraphobic and anxiety-ridden as a result of all this. And at one point, there's a quote where it's, if you're looking for something specific, given all the objects in the world that aren't it, the odds of finding that thing are very low. But if you're going in looking for anything, that's pretty easy to come across. It's just waiting for one of those things to be interesting. And that is a poor paraphrase of the quote, but that is a very helpful idea in trying to approach creative ideas, because your subconscious that you're treating as an Artner will find a more interesting idea than your conscious mind ever could.
Allowing yourself to view creativity as play instead of as, production.
Exactly. Thank you for watching or listening. If you've enjoyed this or found it helpful, please subscribe. We have more episodes coming every other week, hopefully. Head over to shadedareas.com to find out more about Create Art Repeat. We have interview podcast episodes where we talk to creatives about the nonlinear paths that brought them to where they're happy. And if you have any questions or topics you'd like us to address, then feel free to kick them over. We have a new painting kit design called the Watercolor Caddy, which is for sale now. And if you end up looking to pick it up, use promo code CAR for 30% off. Listen to us next time. And for now, stay thoughtful, stay playful, and keep creating.